With the average annual visitor rate growing by the year, over 13 million folks set their sights on this massive piece of pristine land split between Tennessee and North Carolina. Sandwiched on either side, Cherokee and Gatlinburg are premier tourist traps, and the traffic emanating from each is enough to make you want to run for the hills.
This is kind of crazy. This is like Estes Park on steroids. It's so big, like way bigger than what I thought it would be.
I can remember wondering if fishing here was maybe going to be a mistake. From the smoke-filled tips hidden in the haze to the greasy grass valleys where the once forgotten herds congregate, this national park is immense and contains many complex layers. With that in mind, I saw it fit to separate this out as its own story. Most come for the chance at seeing the neon array of foliage or the many charismatic park residents. For anglers like myself panning for blue line gems, it's the brook trout fishing that will draw you in and keep you hunting for that sound of water.
Okay, here we are.
In total, the park encompasses just around 800 square miles of prime temperate and subtropical deciduous forest. Hidden amongst the leaf litter and moss-covered boulders, this dark earth is a hotbed for biodiversity. One could spend a lifetime tracking down the thousands of crawling, swimming, and flying species strewn across this increasingly rare environment. With the many miles of streams meandering from the tip-tops of the mountains down to the sprawling floodplains, you may recognize such names as the Raven and Roaring Fork, Hazel and Cosby Creek, as well as the Little Tennessee and Onconalufty River. Out of all this water, wild brook trout have managed to hold out in around 150 miles of the available 800 flowing within the park. Not too dissimilar from other streams seen up until this point, a lot of the thriving populations have been forced to the higher elevations due to many interconnecting issues. The Great Smoky Mountain National Park has been high on my bucket list of angling destinations for many years now. Through both videos and books, my imagination had conjured up an image of moss-covered cascades brimming to the top with whispers of both orange and green. My mind had somehow manifested this dream and, with such vivid strokes, had painted its way into my reality. Being 10 toes down in this frigid mountain water, it almost seems hard to believe, and holding each one of these unique Southern Appalachian brook trout fulfilled a tightly held promise made to a much younger version of who I once was.
Yeehaw! Yeah, mama! Woo-hoo-hoo! That's a great one.
My first taste of Great Smoky Gold was admittedly short, but boy howdy, it was certainly sweet. This burning-bellied squaretail was the canary in the coal mine for the entirety of this next chapter. I had my eye set on some bigger systems in both North Carolina and Tennessee. These streams were far more remote than where I was today and could offer a true backcountry experience. I suppose time would only tell the result, but I was ready to attack this puzzle head on and uncover more of the mysteries of this incredible national park.
Hey, bear. Well, it sounds like the birds are finally starting to wake up, which is nice. I just saw a bear. There he is, there he is, there he is. That right there, hard to see. That's my first Smokies black bear. Hey, bear! Get on out of here. I'm gonna take the opportunity now to change into my wading boots, get out of the hiking boots, so that I can just jump right onto the water, if need be.
Between the drive-in and hike thus far, I'd already been awake for quite some time. That bear, he managed to get my blood pumping a bit faster, so I was now more than wide awake. But deep in my heart, I somehow still felt a little bit behind. Being that this was a weekend in the park and the purple of dawn was burning off fast, I had every expectation that there would be a few folks already camped out and potentially starting their day of fishing soon. Wanting to separate myself as best as possible, I made a, hasty decision to cut straight for the river rather than following the trail where it passes by the campground. Trying to off-trail traverse this nearly impenetrable environment was an incredibly stupid idea. There were more than a few times where I was convinced the search and rescue team would need a helicopter and a roto-rooter to rip my stiff corpse out of this suffocating hellhole. One bad slip or turn of the knee and I was good as toast. But by the grace of the old mountains, I saw a gap in the trees. Like a cold glass of water on a scorching hot summer day, the first unencumbered breath was deep and very satisfying. The free air carried by the breeze filled my lungs with the sweet scent of this famous fork, and it put my mind at ease. I think the raven was going to be mine for the day.
Good. Okay. I think I've done enough walking. It's time to fish.
In any book or website article, the running claim was that this was unequivocally the best brook trout stream within the park. Watch any YouTube video, or hell, just hear it firsthand from any dedicated blue liner, the sentiment holds true. The Upper Raven Fork is the place you want to be if you're hunting for that 12-inch Southern Appalachian brook trout. Well, allegedly. Now, outside of just the fishing, there are quite a few other reasons as to why I was encouraged to find this fork. But I was warned it'd come with a price. Trying to blaze a path all on my own was nearly impossible. I can't emphasize that enough. This terrain would be sure to give anyone, no matter how well equipped, a damn tricky time. So looking back, it makes sense as to why this drainage was mostly spared by logging companies prior to the establishment of the national park. Back when industry was stripping resources from this region, it seems odd that they didn't or couldn't successfully make their way up to this upper watershed. Just for the spectacle alone, where I was waiting is seen as a unique environment amongst unique environments. These old growth groves are more than few and far between in today's day and age. Rare is an adequate word to describe them. Due to that, everything else around the river felt so different to what I'd experienced prior in this trip. The trunks of some of these trees had been standing tall since feudalism dominated European society, or as the Mongol horde kept its stranglehold on most of Asia, and even as the Incan Empire was starting to see its rise to power. This surrounding timber has stood through it all. Hundreds of years worth of history is hard for our puny brains to put into perspective, and it never fails to make my head spin. This was an old forest. Bringing things back streamside, I couldn't help but feel that the fishing so far could be best described as, well, fair to midland. Now don't get me wrong, the quantity of fish was most certainly present. After that first domino fell, the others quickly followed. I may have let other anglers' accounts influence my now lofty expectations, but for some reason, I was hoping for a bit more. This river was so impressive in both size and flow, but I had to remember this was still a high elevation system. Food must be scarce, but with so much ideal holding water, I held faith and kept casting for that upper tier brook trout. Hey, maybe the big fish were just being a bit sluggish. Recalling back to places like Big Snowbird, the action really didn't get started until early afternoon when terrestrial insects began to move with the warmth of the day. The weather certainly wasn't in my corner, seeing as it was going to be mostly cold and overcast for the foreseeable future. Overall, it's hard to tell what the issue might be, but what I did notice is that the river was quickly changing from big waterfall pools to now very turbid and narrow plunges. Maybe the bigger fish were holding here.
Darling, please forgive me if I stay a little more. I can't look away from those brown eyes. And if we settle down, we don't have to settle down. Please don't be afraid of all the things that could go wrong. We can take our time and we may change our mind. But I can tell a good thing when a good thing comes along. Darling, tell me all about the dreams you had last night. You can be so restless in your sleep. I ain't going nowhere, always feels so very right. When you find good love, it's the one that you should keep. And if we settle down, we don't have to settle down. Please don't be afraid of all the things that could go wrong. That we can take our time and we may change our mind. But I can tell a good thing when a good thing comes along. If I ever hurt you, dear, oh, I apologize. Heaven knows I'm no perfect man. I can't take another night without you by my side. Please come home as quickly as you can. And if we settle down, we don't have to settle down. Please don't be afraid of all the things that could go wrong. We could take our time, we may change our mind. But I can tell a good thing when a good thing comes along.
Maneuvering up and over the infinity staircase of rapids was far from easy and hell on the knees. If it weren't for the predictable placement of brook trout along the way, I could see this being a laborious day in some folks' books. I will say, the scale of the corridor allowed for a comfortable amount of airspace both above and behind for cathartic casting with long drawn-out loops. Like I tend to do, I made the effort to carry 2 rods. The always and ever-present adjustable dry dropper rod and a solo dry fly rod were my adventure partners for the day. Looking back, there was no real need for a third wheel, seeing as the fish were almost exclusively surface-oriented. I can barely remember one, if any, caught using that subsurface presentation. Their affinity for a dainty dry fly dancing on the surface reminds me so much of cutthroat trout behavior out west. And, like I've harped on quite a bit, their watery home doesn't have all that much to offer in the way of fish food. So I'm certain they depend on the surrounding old growth to provide them with terrestrial insects to reliably feed on during the warmer months. So far, my sloppy dry fly casting had been more than enough to punish the small to mid-tier fish in the system. Lulled into ginger hook sets with my stiffer 5-weight, this next fish came as quite a surprise. I was almost certain I had managed to do it. Surely this was the raven fork fish I'd been dreaming of.
Oh, it's a rainbow. It's a good fish, shit.
The disappointment in my voice might rub some the wrong way, but witnessing the steady creep of non-native trout into these supposedly safe strongholds, it's tough. This wasn't the only rainbow I found within the park either. With a much broader habitat tolerance towards silt and pollution, rainbows have a higher fecundity and growth rate when compared to brookies. Even though the rainbows are spring spawners, once their eggs hatch, they will often outcompete the crop of brook trout that were reared in the previous fall. So just give any watershed time, and these rainbows tend to win out. Now in both situations, I was targeting brook trout with no intention to harvest. On top of that, with a slot limit of 7 inches in the park, it didn't even cross my mind as something I ought to do. So really, I had no good way to take these non-native fish out of the system, and I didn't want to kill a wild fish just to kill it. So admittedly, putting them both back felt a little conflicting. The best I can do is offer up this information and allow you, the viewer, to do with what you please. The number of fish on the day had certainly reached a point of satisfaction, and even though the surroundings didn't show, the neutral light was reaching well past mid-afternoon. The clock was ticking, and I only had time for a few more fish, one of which happened to be my favorite of the day. As this brook trout journey continues, I'm becoming more and more fond of the random orange blotches that break up the vermiculated dorsal fins on certain specimens. I should say, all these fish were beautiful in their own right, but this speck in particular was just a bit brighter than the rest. Easy on the eyes, this fish made all the toil worth it. Worth the strained muscles, worth the aching bones, and very much worth the sting of cold water. Well, until next time, friend. Earlier in the day, I'd fallen pretty hard on my left knee, and after a whole day's worth of twisting and turning through the slippery stream bed, radiating pain was growing too loud to ignore over the sound of rushing water. Realistically, I didn't have energy for more casting, and time was no longer on my side. Like many trips before, my eyes had been much bigger than my stomach. Piss and vinegar from the morning's fervor had me convinced that the confluence pool would be my natural stopping point, but I was nowhere even close to that. I learned the hard lesson that one day just might not be enough to fully explore and experience the beauty of this upper valley. This chubby munching brook trout would unfortunately have to be my last. For a parting gift from this old growth fortress, I couldn't complain all that much. But with that being said, I might have a few choice words for the series of slippery waterfalls in my future. Going up was easy enough. Sliding down, well, that almost resulted in disaster. But that story, it might be left for another day. Oh, and I'm sure glad I brought my bear spray with me on this one. It looks like my friend from earlier, he got a little grumpy. So much so, in fact, they actually closed down the trail behind me. All in all, this was an incredible day and truly a beautiful backcountry experience out east. Pressured from behind by the glaring taillights of the many other ravenous park goers, I found myself on the Tennessee side this time around. The books I read, they weren't kidding. Things felt considerably more crowded.
Want to get our picture? I see you're a photographer.
Do you want me to take a picture, you guys? Is that what you're asking?
I'm kidding you. Like, you wanted to get our picture.
Yes, here. Here's my, will you take a picture of us?
Yeah, of course. I'm so confused right now, yeah.
Now, that could be my own fault, because here I was again on yet another weekend, parked parallel to one of the park's many famous trails. Desperate to avoid the crowds congregating in the lot, I buckled down and used my young legs to create distance. Gaining elevation with each step, the clouds hanging in the treetops seemed to be falling all around me like a slow but steady elevator ride. The humidity was so thick and heavy, it physically felt like I was walking through flowing linens hung to air dry along the trail. Unaccompanied by flashes or claps, the first heavy drop made an audible splat as it fell on the brim of my cap. With each step up the path, the cold rain hitting my hot skin grew slowly at first. Clearly, rain was inevitable, but I wasn't ready to witness the true power these clouds had been hiding this whole time.
Man, it's really starting to rain now. Oh. Whew. It's really raining now. Guess it's just gonna be one of those days. Hopefully the fish don't mind. Let's get you out. Well, and just like that, the rain subsided, and here we are.
Feeling like a cat in the rain, I was thoroughly soaked from head to toe before I ever set foot in the water. But here I was, the mighty Lynn Camp Prom. On a more granular level, I'm sure there are quite a few things that she shares with her raven sister over the ridge. But outside of hosting a robust brook trout population, I really didn't see all that much to compare this and the Upper Ravens Fork. The first and by far the most important differentiating detail worth noting is the elevation. On the Raven, I started my day around that 3,000 foot mark and climbed all the way to 4. The general rule of thumb in this part of the world is to not start looking for brook trout until you hit that 3,000 mark. That's the reason I chose to pursue a different stream today. Hovering right around the mid-2000s, I was much lower in elevation by comparison. Now you could most certainly push further up into the higher reaches of this well-publicized prong, but that wasn't the point. Low and mid-elevation brook trout streams all across Appalachia, and especially in the national park, are extremely rare. In most cases, browns and rainbows dominate these portions of the watersheds, and the further down you go, you'll start seeing smallmouth. The rain had softened the color of the deep green water, and out of the dancing riffles came the first flash of orange cutting through the fog. Wow. For a first fish, this was a speckled up spectacle. Overpronounced par markings were so well defined and gave this fish a different look. Almost overshadowed, but caught right at the last second, was the vermiculate patterns on the back bleeding further down into the tail fin. This was a fine way to shake off the skunk.
All right, We are in business here, and I put on a, I guess you could call that like a pink tan leech. This looks like either a worm or potentially a salamander getting washed into the water here. So we'll see how aggressive these fish are and if they want to eat something bigger with the influx of this rain here this morning. All right, made it back to the trail. I'm gonna do that again. I'm gonna walk down, find another section. It's kind of away from the trail, dip in, fish it up, and yeah, maybe catch a few more at least.
Inclement weather and high-holing anglers had certainly slowed me down, so I admittedly didn't really crack down on the stream as well as I would have liked. This would be my last visit to the park, and with the fishing proving to be this good, I would have killed to have an extra day on this system. Now, taking a brief snapshot of this little instant in time doesn't really paint a great picture, because not too long ago, the brook trout fishing would have been non-existent here. Circa 2008, non-native rainbows were dominating the majority of this stream above the many natural cascades along the trail. There was an extensive push by the park to remove these fish and return this productive mid-elevation stream back to the native brook trout. It took many years and countless man-hours to see it to its fruition, and for a long time, it was closed to us anglers. Personally, I'm ecstatic that they've been able to open it back up to the general public in the last decade or so. Sure makes for easy access to some of the best brook trout fishing in the region. I really can't understate the importance of this stream and the success of this restoration. Sure, there have been other places within the borders that have been given back to the natives, but not to the same degree with both scale and significance. This project allowed the many high elevation tributaries to finally be reconnected to the lower elevation main body of the system. And as my day was reaching its end, I really want to stop for a second and talk about the very relevant concept of connectivity. Now, it's no secret that a 12-inch trout doesn't really provoke the fanfare of many fly anglers across this pale blue dot. Like I've said time and time again, finding a Southern Appalachian brook trout anywhere close to that 12-inch mark is nothing short of a real angling accomplishment. You blue liners out there, you gotta have my back on that. I'm sure you're sitting there asking yourself at this point, why does Mike keep bringing this up? Well, it's because these Southern Appalachian fish could get a lot bigger if there was better connectivity within the watersheds they live. Now, hold your horses. I'm not saying these humble char will be able to balloon to the proportions of places like Labrador, but hear me out. On the larger end of this spectrum, you could point at something to the scale of a hydroelectric dam and the massive reservoirs they tend to leave in their wake. Controlled by the power company, and now with recreation and real estate interests involved too, I don't foresee a day where these get taken off the land. It's sad, and we're kind of stuck with them. On the smaller scale, something as simple as a culvert used to reroute water can be just as detrimental in cutting off populations of fish from one another. Throughout this journey, I also found barriers installed by desperate state agencies in an attempt to disrupt the ever-encroaching invasion of non-native fish like this wild rainbow trout. My point here is that all these barriers, no matter what their original purpose was meant to be, disrupt the various life histories these fish could display. For the vast majority of the Southern Appalachian brook trout, they only have access to habitat that allows them to display the stream resident life history. This means they hatch, grow, spawn, and die in the very narrow confines of the stream in which they were reared. We're talking miles, 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 if they're lucky, but they don't have that much room to grow. On top of that, statistically, each individual is supposed to have an almost 60% mortality rate once they reach adulthood. Just due to predation, competition, and natural disasters like flash floods, these brook trout in the higher elevations have a very heavy turnover. These pressured environmental factors don't really give an individual a whole lot of opportunity to track down big meals or the time needed to grow past that 12-inch range. I made it a point to step foot into some of the lower elevation streams in the region, and do you know what I found? Food. I found lots of fish food. Between minnows, dace, chubs, darters, and sculpins, the further down you go, the more you're gonna find. That's not to mention crayfish, hellgrammites, frogs, and even mice all throughout. Going up yet another level, I went back and read some old records of such thick runs of spawning suckerfish from Georgia to Virginia, they would sometimes be compared to the Pacific salmon runs west of the Rockies. But even many of those once prolific spawning runs have been disrupted by fractured systems.
Most of the emphasis so far has really been focused on the brook trout, and that's the goal of this video, is to talk about them, but you can't tell their story without talking about some of the other fish in these systems. And it kind of goes back to this point of connectivity. It's a big issue, be it in the east or in the west, but it affects all these native fish, especially our brook trout. But one of the things about these streams is that there are so many different species of non-game fish. So your sticklebacks, your darters, your mad toms, any number of little catfish and other minnow species like that are present in these systems. And you'll have bigger ones even, like your suckers and some bass species. And those bigger fish, they bring nutrients, much like your salmon, in a fully intact system. They'll go out into the bigger water, come up to spawn smaller water, but that doesn't really happen a whole lot. Now, there are some cool projects going on where be it dam removals or impoundments getting taken out to help have that more connective system, but it's a slow uphill battle. I guess my point in saying all this and showing all these non-game native fish species is that these are the puzzle pieces, these are the items needed to make bigger fish. So in a lot of these brook trout streams, 12 inches is going to be the top tier. That's going to be the best most of these blue liners do out here. That is for wild native fish. Stockfish, you can catch some big fish, but these smaller fish, just like any other food chain, you build up, you build up, you build up. The more of these small fish that you have in a system, the more forage a fish has, and the less likely it's going to be to starve. Because, a lot of these streams out here, like you've maybe seen already, are pretty barren. There's not a lot of biomass available to grow big fish. That's why out west you have these just bug factories producing large numbers and sizes of fish. But out here, you might have 1 or 2 wild native brook trout to a hole, and they don't have much in the way of food. That's why they're so dependent on what comes into the water from terrestrial sources, and that's why the dry fly fishing out here is really great. But I don't know, I dream of a day, after getting to experience all these different streams, I really do, I dream of a day where these systems get connected and more of these forage fish that are kind of coming from some of the lower elevation parts of these streams can be reconnected, and those brook trout can have a more fluvial life pattern, go from their high up spawning grounds back into some more nutrient rich, biomass rich environments, and get bigger. But that's probably far down the road, but who knows? A lot can change in a little bit of time.
Be it red horse sucker eggs in the spring, sipping cicadas in the summer, hunting mice in the fall, or sucking down sculpin all winter long, imagine how much more food these fish would be able to access if they can move freely throughout interconnected systems. I really hope you're understanding what I'm trying to say here. Brook trout have lost access to more than 75% of these low to mid-tier elevation streams all throughout their native range. I mean, that number alone kind of makes my mind spin. The more systems that could be restored and reconnected, the better chance we would all have to see bigger fish living out a more fluvial life stage, affording the opportunity for fish to move out of the higher elevations and down into the big water would be extremely interesting to see. Unencumbered by fractured habitat, I truly believe these brook trout could live longer and outgrow that 12-inch mark. I couldn't help but optimistically daydream of a world where my grandkids could maybe go chase fluvial Southern Appalachian brook trout way down in the big water. For now, I suppose the beautiful brook trout of the Lynn Camp Prong will have to be the model for future success. In a flash of orange, my last great smoky fish snapped me out of this hopeful trance, and it was time to go. Funny enough, on my way back, I had a group of hikers stop me and ask me what kind of fish was swimming down in that stream. Was it largemouth bass? I have to admit this was pretty funny, and I asked them if they'd ever heard of brook trout. They were mostly unfamiliar, and I kind of wish I could have introduced them to my new friend, because he knows a great deal about these little fish. After many months of correspondence back and forth and filming permits pushed through right in the nick of time, I was so excited for this interview. Seeing as this was quite a unique opportunity, I figured I'd start things out fairly simple. I wanted to know if he remembered his first brook trout.
Yeah, I do remember my first brook trout. I was fishing with my dad. I grew up in Pennsylvania, and we were fishing a stream at a gun club that he was a member of. That's where I learned to do a lot of fishing and shooting, and we usually caught rainbow trout. And so I hooked this fish that I knew was different. And as I brought it up, first I noticed the color of the fins was different. But what really struck me was when I put my hand on that fish, just to feel the feel of a char is different. And I picked that brook trout up, and my dad was like, wow, you caught a brook trout. So that was really my first introduction to this different trout, so to speak, that I'd never seen before. I was probably about 6 years old.
That's awesome.
So it was pretty cool.
So if that was your first brook trout, can you talk to me about your first Southern Appalachian brook trout?
Yeah, man, what a dichotomy. I mean, when I first came to the Smoky Mountains and I started working here, we got to go out and do some electrofishing on a stream, and I believe it was over in Indian Camp Creek, which is over in the Cobb County portion of the park. And we got rolled in there, and we're doing this site, and we rolled up this fish, and I remember just being stunned by the look at this fish. I mean, it didn't look real. The big red spots, the big bright orange and reddish fins with the black and white trim on those, and I couldn't believe it was a brook trout. I was like, this doesn't even look like the fish that I grew up fishing for when I was a kid, the stockers. And so just fell in love with that fish right away. Just the beauty of it, and just being amazed at something like that living in these mountains was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
After everything I'd seen and read up until this point, the most pressing question on my mind was whether or not these fish were in serious trouble.
Are brook trout in trouble? That's a good question, in the sense that I think it depends where you're at. In the southeast, at least here in the Smokies, I think our brook trout were in trouble for a number of decades. And the reason was they were being pinched from the bottom by encroachment of rainbow trout. We had really big problems with acid deposition and acid rain, which was squeezing them from the top. The good news there is that recently acid rain has become much, much, much better, to the point where our water, our pH of the rain coming in is doing tremendously better than it did 40 years ago. The issue is it's going to take a long time for those soils that feed our streams and buffer that material to become healthy. So one other piece of that question, as far as the future of brook trout, that I think is important is climate. And I think one of the big things that benefit brook trout where they live is the influence of groundwater. And what we see is our groundwater resources are pretty stable. In fact, warmer and wetter as they project wouldn't be all bad for brook trout, because the groundwater influence is going to be there. The question mark becomes when that climate, continues to get worse, continues to increase, what is the resiliency of our groundwater resources? And that's a question we just don't know. And so I think in the short term they have some buffering versus some other species. The question is the long term in terms of climate and how that's going to affect those populations up high.
With that in mind, I was curious as to what conservation efforts we're doing right when trying to restore brook trout.
I think right now is a really cool time for conservation of brook trout because for many years the park was one of the leaders in restoring native brook trout species across the range, both with electrofishing and toxicants. And what's happened in probably the last 2-3 years is in states like Tennessee, North Carolina are really jumping in. Tennessee's been doing it probably for more like 5 or 10 years. North Carolina's got a whole slew of streams that they're predicting to restore over the next 5 to 10 years. And so all that is adding more range back into the distribution of these fish in the Southeast. Georgia is getting ready to do some. South Carolina's done at least 4. You start adding those states up and the mileages, it's a pretty exciting time really for brook trout restoration and putting fish back on the landscape. And as these streams recover from acidification, we can just keep adding to that list. And so I think that's one thing the states and the federal government agencies are doing right now.
Naturally, I was also interested in what the biggest bottlenecks to helping these fish might be.
I guess I would look at about 3 or 4 different big bottlenecks in the world of brook trout. One would be habitat protection. If you look across the range, the Smokies, we're in the forever business, so the habitat's forever protected. Well, once you get out of the Smokies, this place is turned into an island because you have development, headwater development in a lot of places in East Tennessee and Western North Carolina. So that's a big bottleneck problem going forward, protecting their habitat. Number 2, I would say soil recovery. No matter where they're at, the entire Southeast has been, as we said, hammered by nitrogen and sulfur from emissions. And so it's going to take some time for that to get cleaned up and to move its way out of the system and recover, get those soil pHs and stream pHs back up. And I think the other big bottleneck that I see in the future that we have to be concerned about, and every one of us can help with this, is keeping these brook trout and where they live relevant. These are special places. If we start losing the relevancy with our younger generations, then they don't have a reason to keep protecting them. Take your kids out, show them these places, get out there and fish for these things where they're at. It's an awesome place, and it's good for the soul to be out there and check them out.
As far as end goal, what do you want to see with all this conservation work? Like in a 20, 40, 60 year period down the road, when we're all long and gone, what do you hope to see be the result of all this work?
I guess my goal with all this work would be, we know the climate is always, temperature's always increasing and is always decreased over time. And so hopefully there's enough protected places that we've restored brook trout, or at least protect brook trout, that they can survive these periods of warming and development and land encroachment, such that we can preserve enough the genetics and enough populations to sustain them for the next generations to come. And that's I think the goal for all of us, for a lot of species we all work with.
This may seem like a lofty end goal to some, but Rome wasn't built in a day. I saved this last question for this exact reason. I wanted to know what folks out there could do to help the Southern Appalachian brook trout.
Well, there's a lot of different answers to that question. So I guess I would start off with, first of all, understanding where these fish live and educating yourself on that. What's cool about where brook trout live is there's so many other things that people would love to see. You might find a red-cheeked salamander, or a shovel-nosed salamander, or a black-bellied salamander. You might see rock gnome lichen, which is a rare plant. You might just like to sit there and watch the waterfalls and cascades where they live. It's just an awesome place, and they're worth protecting. And I think once you kind of get a grasp of that and see it, it kind of gets in your blood. It kind of gets in your soul that this is something worth protecting, worth saving. And then, figure out how you can do that. There's a lot of conservation organizations out there that are helping us do that.
Matt mentioned that organizations like the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, Trout Unlimited, and the Eastern Brook Trout Joint Venture are all able to offer help in their own way.
And then there's opportunities to get involved with volunteering. The Park Service is one. The state agencies in many cases will have opportunities for you to come out, whether they're doing a population sample, just to keep a pulse on how those populations are doing, maybe to collect some fin clips for genetics testing, or maybe to do an actual restoration on the stream to remove non-natives and put native brook trout or specks back in. I mean, those are all great ways to come and get involved if you have an opportunity, and to connect with that resource as well. And finally, I guess I would say, for people that live far away, maybe not just another state, maybe another country, all the things I mentioned, many of them would work for you, but In other ways, it may be, you know, making that connection with that place to a place there where you live. And, you know, maybe you can do a restoration or have a similar type of experience in your homeland. And, you know, take that opportunity at some point to come to the States and see where these brook trout live and make what makes them special here as well.
I'd hate to sound like a broken record here, but I cannot emphasize how amazing of an opportunity it was interviewing Matt Kulp. His knowledge base alone was so impressive, and I really think we could have sat there all day long talking brook trout. Before we leave the national park, I'd like to stop again for just a bit and further the conversation on how you, the viewer at home, can help these fish. Okie doke. I wasn't quite sure where I wanted to put this in the video. You know, I don't like these big pauses in the storyline, but this is the best spot for it. But before I even started filming, before I even started doing research, this was something I wanted to have within this particular video. You know, I wanted to make something a little bit more fish focused rather than just Mike and friends going out and having fun. I wanted it to be something bigger than itself, you know, have some sort of conservation element to it. And yeah, I want to talk about that a little bit more right now, because maybe it's clear to see through the video as I've been kind of narrating along, but the host of issues that are plaguing the Southern Appalachian brook trout and others in its native range here in the east, the list is long, and it's all intertwined. It's not as simple as, you know, a series of dams on the Snake River, or something as sexy as maybe like the Pebble Mine and a big issue that everybody can get behind and sign a petition and block that and you damn industry people. You know, it's not as simple as that. It's so many intertwined issues, and that comes from the environmental side, that comes from the social side, you know, the people involved and the people's wants and needs, and yeah, like land encroachment. Loss of habitat is such an issue out here, but it's tough because there is a lot of private land, and the public land that is here, you know, it's slowly getting encroached on, and water quality is an issue. Acid rain was a big issue. You know, there's various studies about the changes in temperature and climate and how it fluctuates, and this all goes into the picture of the brook trout that are here, and, you know, the possibility of brook trout tomorrow. So I worked with the national park, so the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. I was very lucky to interview the lead biologist, fisheries biologist, I should say. Matt Kulp is an amazing dude, and he's really doing some amazing stuff for the park, and then it reverberates out to, you know, other parts of the native range. But fall season and our various partners, you know, we have a little bit of expendable cash. You know, the YouTube money, it's a neat thing, and for this one, I wanted to maybe, instead of putting that towards the next trip or the next camera, put it towards conservation. And so Flow Season and our partners, we've put together a lump sum, I would say a pretty sizable one, and we're going to be donating it directly to the national park. Now, this fund that they have goes directly to brook trout. The most streamlined way is through the donation tab on the Friends of the Smokies homepage. Select the Make a Gift option and fill out your own personal information, but the major key here is when you get towards the bottom. Mention in the comments section that you would like these funds to go towards brook trout restoration. I've been assured that no matter how far down the road you're seeing this video, specifically stating your donations are meant for brook trout restoration is a surefire way of getting these funds to where they need to go. This was by far the most effective option, and in the end, it is extremely appreciated. They use this money to hire on fisheries technicians for the summertime, usually interns from college. And so, yeah, not only are you helping because they're helping, but then you're also, you know, giving a kid a really awesome opportunity to do something that they love and get their feet dirty and, get their hands dirty, get their feet wet, in a really cool environment. And so I'm not saying that you have to donate. That's the last thing I want to say, because everybody's financial situation is different, and yeah, times are tough. I understand. And so I just want to put that out there and say that there is a way, you know, for those of you who are in the West or in the North or in the South, or maybe even not in the same country. Maybe some of you are learning about these fish for the first time. And so
being able to sign up for volunteer opportunities, being in touch with the local Native Fish Coalition chapters or Trout Unlimited chapters. Like, you cannot be there for cleanups or restorations and be a part of decision making. It's not feasible. But what you can do, sitting on your couch watching this video, is you can get on your phone, because everybody's just probably just sitting right here, and you can go donate to a really awesome thing like the national park. And again, specifically, this channel is for the fisheries and the brook trout. And so, yeah, I mean, talking with Matt and getting to get a better understanding of the ins and outs of the park, and again, how that money tangibly affects the fish. And I personally got to experience it. And so I think it's a really awesome cause. And if you have the means, I would highly recommend doing it, and then seeing the effects of your donations. So yeah, come give the park a visit. But I don't need to tell you that their tourism board's doing just fine. But yeah, I wanted to stop and offer that, because I think it's important. And I guess as I've got a platform that's raising, and as fly season continues to grow, I do want to do more stuff like this. This is hopefully the first of many. So thank you if you are generous enough to offer a bit of your valuable income. And let's get back to the video and finish this thing out.